All right, in chapter 12, we're going to be talking about the cell cycle. This is going to include just the regular processes that a cell goes through as it is alive and functioning within a unicellular or multicellular organism. And it also is going to include the process that the cell takes to go through division. So as we get started, the ability of organisms to produce more of their own kind really best distinguishes living things from non-living things, right? Living things can reproduce more of their own kind, and this process of reproduction really depends on cell division, right? If you want to make new organisms, you have to make more cells. And so a lot of this chapter, we are going to focus on this process of cell division and the regulation of when a cell goes through cell division, when it doesn't, when it goes through different parts of the cell cycle. Now, when we talk about cell division, it means different things for unicellular versus multicellular organisms. In a unicellular organism, division of one cell really reproduces the entire organism. So this is actually not just cellular division, but it's also reproduction for a unicellular organism. For multicellular organisms, it's a little bit different, right? When one of your skin cells goes through cell division to make another skin cell, you don't make a whole new you, right? Although that would be pretty awesome. You have tons of clones of yourself. You can be really productive, but this is not the way that it works for multicellular organisms. However, this is not to say that cell division is still not important for a multicellular organism. It is very, very critical for the maintenance, survival, growth, development of that multicellular organism to allow its cells to go through cell division. So 3 things listed here on this slide that depend on cell division in a multicellular organism include development from a fertilized cell. All right, so every single one of us started out as a single cell, just one lowly little cell when the egg cell was fertilized by the sperm cell to create that zygote. From here, that zygote divided to 2 cells, and those 2 cells divided to make 4 and 8 and 16 and so on and so forth, until eventually you grew, you developed into the multicellular organism that you are now, made out of trillions of cells. So for multicellular organism, we need cell division to develop from a fertilized cell and also to grow bigger. And then once we reach our full adult size, we still need cell division to make sure that we can repair and maintain our tissues, right? We are on a daily basis losing skin cells from the surface of our skin, also in our digestive tracts. We're replenishing cells in our respiratory system. When we cut ourselves, right, wounds heal. This also is dependent on cell division. So clearly, even though, when one of our cells as a multicellular organism reproduces, we don't create a new human, we still depend on cell division to make sure that we can grow and we can maintain. Now, as we focus in this chapter on cell division really is only a small but important part of what we call the cell cycle, or the full generation or full lifespan of a cell. And so on this slide, we define the cell cycle as the life of a cell from its original formation to when it goes through its own cell division to create new daughter cells. Now, when we talk about cell division, there are really 2 different kinds of cell division. We're going to focus on one type in this chapter, chapter 12, and then a different kind in chapter 13. Most cell division, and the cell division that we focus on here in chapter 12, is cell division which creates genetically identical daughter cells. This is called mitosis. So it's essentially creating clones of the same cell, right? You take one cell, you copy it, and you make 2 cells out of that single cell. That's mitosis. The exception, or the other kind of cell division, which we're going to talk about in chapter 13, is called meiosis. This is a special type of cell division in animals that can produce sperm and egg cells. Sperm and egg cells are also called your gametes, or your reproductive cells. And meiosis is different in that it does produce daughter cells, but these daughter cells are not genetically identical to each other. They're actually different from each other. And so we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that once we get to chapter 13 and we dive into the details of meiosis. Now, in either case, copying of the genetic material before a cell goes through division, whether it's mitosis or meiosis, is very important. So let's review a little bit of what we know, maybe build on some new information on what we know about the cell's genome or genetic makeup. So all of the DNA in a cell is called the cell's genome. And depending on what kind of cell it is, the genome could be a little bit different. So for example, if you're looking at a prokaryotic cell, the genome is much smaller. It typically contains only one DNA molecule. Remember, this double-stranded DNA molecule is a double helix, and it's circular in a prokaryotic cell, right? So there's no beginning and no end. It's just one big circle. In eukaryotic cells, it's a little bit different. Every eukaryotic cell will have 2 or more chromosomes, and these are going to be, again, double helical DNA molecules, but they're linear, so they have a beginning and an end. And when we look at a single DNA molecule, which is a DNA double helix, a single DNA molecule will make up something called a chromosome. So a chromosome is essentially the structure that is that one DNA molecule. If we take a look at the cell on this slide right here, the cell is going through division. So what it has done, it has compacted or condensed all of its chromosomes in the nucleus here in the center. So all these little blue worms are actually individual chromosomes, so single DNA molecules that have packed really tightly together so that it's easier for the cell to move them around as it needs to do to separate them for cell division, to make sure that each daughter cell gets the right genetic material at the end of the division process. Okay, now if we were to focus a little bit more on eukaryotes and their DNA, so remember that eukaryotic chromosomes are linear and they're really, really long. And so the cell needs to organize them. The way that the cell organizes them, it uses proteins. These proteins are called histones, and the cell will take multiple histones and make a spool out of them. And then it'll take its DNA and it'll wind it around these spools to help organize it. And so when you're looking at a eukaryotic cell's chromosome, really you're looking, yes, at the DNA, but also at all the protein that's used to organize that DNA. And this material, DNA plus protein, is called chromatin. So eukaryotic chromosomes are made out of material called chromatin. Now, if I were to give you an analogy, I like to think of chromatin kind of like yarn, right? Yarn is a material. You can make different things out of this yarn. You can knit yourself a sweater, for example. So chromatin is like the yarn, and the chromosome is like the sweater. It's a specific structure that's created out of this chromatin material, just like a sweater is a specific structure that's made out of this material called yarn. Right, and again, chromatin is made out of both DNA and protein. Now, every eukaryotic organism, every eukaryotic species, I should say, has a characteristic number of chromosomes in each nucleus. So, for example, in humans, our characteristic number is 46. Under normal conditions, every single one of your cells is going to have 46 chromosomes, with a couple of exceptions here or there. Algae have like 140 some chromosomes. Dogs, cats, elephants, they all have their specific species number of chromosomes in their cells. When we look at a multicellular organism like a human, for example, we really have 2 different kinds of cells. Right, really broad categories. We have our somatic cells, and then we have our gametes. Let's take a look at both of these. So somatic cells are going to make up the majority of your body. These are your non-reproductive cells. And somatic cells are going to include things like your skin cells and muscle cells and brain cells, right? Everything that has nothing to do with reproduction. And all of your somatic cells have 2 sets of chromosomes to equal the normal human number of 46. On the other hand, you also have gametes. These are going to be your reproductive cells, so your sperm and your egg cells. These guys have only half the number of chromosomes that your somatic cells have. So as a human, somatic cells have 46, That means that your gametes, sperm or egg, depending whether you're female or male, are only going to have 23, or only one set of chromosomes. And this will be important later when we talk about meiosis and reproduction.